The shadow was the first thing that hit me during my second week at the cabin. It got dark at midnight, and as I sat quietly, holding my breath, I noticed something strange. The outside mountains and forest were shrouded in darkness, and the glass in the hallway seemed to hurt my eyes. The window wasn't reflecting the inside. Instead, it was an impossibly dark void. I could see the lake's bottom without going any further, and then the shadow appeared. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its shape was wrong, stretched as if it didn't quite fit into our world. The shadow drifted across the glass with a measured slowness, its edges rippling like ink spilled in water. I froze, unable to tear my gaze away, as if the shadow was staring back at me. I remembered the rule, close your eyes until the room goes silent, but I didn't. The shadow paused, and what I thought was its head tilted slightly. Then, with an odd lurch, it moved toward the front door. I heard something sharp dragging against the wooden frame, followed by a low, guttural hum that rumbled through my chest. The doorknob moved once, twice, and then came the knock. 3 slow, measured thuds that made my breath catch. It shouldn't have been able to knock. It wasn't meant to know I was there. The hum grew louder, swelling into something primal, something alive. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the floor and slamming into the front desk. My hand found the whistle hanging around my neck, an old relic from my past, and I gripped it tightly, though I knew it wouldn't help. When I dared to look back at the door, the shadow was gone. The rules had warned me about this, but in my panic, I'd broken them, and now I was certain I had invited something into the lodge. My life wasn't always like this. Before the lodge, before the rules, I was just Nick, the coach, the guide, the guy everyone thought had his act together. I used to run drills and holler from the sidelines, waiting for the sound of sneakers squeaking against polished gym surfaces. But that was before the incident. It's funny how one moment can ruin everything. A bad call during an important game, a heated argument, and a mistake I'll never forgive myself for. A young player, bright, skilled, and full of promise, left my team in an ambulance. The fallout was harsh. The media circled like birds. The school board made their statements, and parents whispered my name like it was a curse. They didn't need to fire me. I quit before they got the chance. After that, my life unraveled faster than I could hold it together. Teaching jobs were off the table, and I didn't have a backup plan. Months turned into years, and my once beautiful whistle became a weight around my neck, a memory of the person I used to be. When I found the ad for the lodge manager job, I wasn't looking for redemption. I was looking for escape. The pay was absurd, $65 an hour for what seemed like simple work. Discretion and flexibility needed, the article read. I didn't ask questions. I didn't care about the place, the isolation, or the vague job description. All I wanted was a fresh start, somewhere far from my mistakes. If I had known what awaited me in that lodge, I would have torn that ad to shreds. The drive to the lodge felt like falling into another world. The road twisted through dense woods that seemed to close in around my car, the sunlight fading with every mile. By the time I reached the land, the air was heavy with the kind of stillness that makes you feel unwelcome. The lodge itself was a towering relic of another age, its grand facade marred by time and neglect. Wooden steps creaked under my weight as I approached the front door. The door opened with a groan that sounded almost like a warning. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine and something shiny. The floors were shiny but uneven, and the walls were lined with faded pictures of faces I didn't recognize. The front desk was the only new addition, cluttered with ledgers and a single keyring that held far fewer keys than I expected for a place of this size. An older man with a lined face and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through me met me there. He introduced himself as Mr. Carver, the lodge's owner. "You'll find everything you need in the guide," he said, sliding a covered envelope across the counter. "Follow the rules, and you'll do just fine." The way he said it didn't feel calming. I waited until I was alone to open the envelope. Inside was a crisp sheet of paper with the rules typed out in bold, harsh font. "Obey these rules. They are your only safety." I laughed at first, wondering what I needed safety from. Bears? But as I read on, the humor drained from me. Rule 1. Never give a guest room 7. If someone asks politely, refuse and report it in the guest book quickly. Rule 2. If the fireplace in the entrance extinguishes on its own, place 3 pine cones on the hearth and light it again, using only the flint box provided under the counter. Do not use matches. Rule 3. If you see a shadow pass by the lodge windows between 12 a.m. and 12:30 a.m., close your eyes until the room goes completely silent. Do not speak. Rule 4. If a guest checks in but leaves no footprints in the snow, give them a room key, but never write their name in the guest book. Their room will lock itself when they are ready to leave. Rule 5. If a mirror in any room cracks while you're inside, do not clean it or remove it. Leave immediately and ensure the door stays locked for 24 hours. Rule 6. The lodge's dinner bell will ring at 8:33 p.m. every night, even if no one is in the dining room. Wait exactly 2 minutes, then enter the room and blow out the single candle that will be on the main table. Rule 7. Do not trust the wall clock between 3 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. If the time seems wrong, leave the lodge immediately and wait outside until the hands return to normal. Rule 8. If you hear piano music from the lodge's ballroom, do not investigate. Instead, hum the tune quietly to yourself until it stops. Rule 9. If you know a guest from your past, treat them as a stranger. They will not remember you. Rule 10. Room 9's door will occasionally whisper your name. If it does, knock 3 times and leave. Do not enter under any circumstances. Rule 11. When locking up for the night, always count the chairs in the entryway. If there are more or fewer than 10, do not proceed upstairs. Return to the front desk and wait until sunrise. Room tasks, shadowy figures, cracked glass, and dinner bells. It all sounded like the setup for some complex prank. But Mr. Carver didn't strike me as the joking type. My first encounter with the rules came sooner than I had expected. It was my 3rd night at the cabin, and things had been uneventful. Quiet, even. Most of the guests kept to themselves, their interactions with me limited to polite nods and short exchanges. That night, however, a man approached the desk just as I was about to turn in. "I'd like room 7, he said, his voice low and steady. The request immediately set off danger bells in my mind. Rule number 1 was clear. Never give a guest room 7. If someone asks politely, refuse and report it in the guest book immediately. "I'm sorry," I answered, keeping my tone as calm as possible. "That room isn't available." The man's face didn't change, but his dark, unsettling eyes bored into mine. He was trying to unearth some hidden truth. "It's the only room I want," he said. I paused, my hand hovering over the keys. Something about the way he stood, The artificial stillness of his posture made my stomach churn. I managed to stammer out the same excuse, and he eventually relented, taking a key to room 5 instead. As soon as he left, I grabbed the guest book and flipped to the page where I was meant to report the incident. My hand shook as I scrawled the entry, marking the time and his fixation on room 7. Later that night, as I made my rounds, I found myself lingering near room 7. The door was closed, as it had been since I arrived, and a heavy padlock secured it. But as I stared at it, I thought I heard something, a faint tapping sound, slow and deliberate. I backed away quickly, my chest tight with fear. By the time I reached the front desk, my ears were ringing. I didn't sleep that night. I learned the importance of the fireplace routine the hard way. The lodge's main lobby was overshadowed by a huge stone fireplace, its hearth worn smooth from decades of use. Rule 2 warned, if the flame extinguishes on its own, place 3 pine cones on the hearth and light it again. Do not use matches, only the flint box given under the counter. At first, I didn't take the rule seriously. I figured it was more of a custom than a necessity, an eccentric requirement passed down through generations of lodge managers. One night, though, the fire went out. I had been sitting at the desk, half asleep, when the sudden drop in temperature jolted me awake. The room felt colder than it should have, colder than it ever had before. My breath came out in invisible puffs, and I noticed frost creeping along the edges of the windows. That's when the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound was too deliberate, too close. It was as if a dozen voices were whispering just out of earshot, their words incomprehensible, but heavy with malice. I scrambled for the flint box, my hands clumsy with panic. When I struck it, the spark seemed overly bright, casting long shadows across the walls. The fire roared to life the moment the pine cones caught, and the whispers stopped as suddenly as they had begun. The frost melted, and the room returned to its normal temperature. I sat there for hours, staring at the fire, scared to leave its warmth and light. Whatever I had nearly invited in, it wasn't something I wanted to face again. The dinner bell was an old brass light hanging near the dining room entrance. Every night, at exactly 8:33 p.m., it rang, even if no one was in the room. Rule number 6 told me to wait exactly 2 minutes before entering to extinguish a single candle that would appear on the main table. On my 6th night, I broke the rule. I was distracted, trying to understand the older guestbook entries and make sense of the strange dates when the bell rang. I barely noticed. By the time I remembered the rule, it was too late. The next morning, I found the dining room in chaos. The chairs, which had been neatly arranged the night before, were all turned to face the walls. Plates and silverware were stacked precariously in the middle of the table, and the candle from the previous night was burned down to a stub. I cleaned the mess quickly, unease gnawing at me. It wasn't until I stepped back into the hallway that I noticed something else. One of the chairs had been moved. It now stood just a few feet from the front desk, facing me. The mirrors in the lodge were another peculiar part of the rules. Rule number 5 warned, if a mirror in any room cracks while you're inside, do not clean it or remove it. Leave quickly and ensure the door stays locked for 24 hours. I didn't think much of it until I found myself in room 6. I had been checking the plumbing when I heard the sound. A sharp, hard crack echoed through the room. I turned to see the mirror above the dresser split down the middle. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at the shattered glass. That's when I noticed something moving. Something shifted within the shards. Not my image, but something else. It was faint at first, just a ripple, but then it grew more distinct. A dark, hunched figure moved in the pieces, its head tilting as if to study me. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. My hand shook as I fumbled with the key, locking it tight. I stayed up all night, staring at the hallway leading to room 6, waiting for something to emerge. Nothing did, but the next morning, the mirror was gone. By my second week, the rules were no longer just directions. They were a matter of survival. It wasn't until I found the guest book's oldest entries that I began to understand the lodge's true nature. The dates went back centuries, yet the ink on some pages looked fresh. The names were strange, foreign, and unpronounceable. Then there were the symbols, lines that looked like they belonged in some ancient text rather than a guest list. One night, as I flipped through the book, I noticed something chilling. My name, Nick Sanders, room 7. The ink was still drying. The house wasn't just a place, it was a gateway, a crossroads for beings that didn't belong in our world. The rules weren't for my safety. They were to ensure I played my role in keeping the lodge's secrets intact. When I finally left, I thought I was free, but the house wasn't done with me. The guests began showing up in my home, silent, unmoving, always watching. Then one night, I heard the dinner bell ring. The first time I saw one of them in my house, I thought it was a nightmare. I had been back home for less than a week, trying to adjust to life after the lodge. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the floors, every flicker of shadow in the corner of my view set my nerves on edge. I had taken to leaving the TV on at night, its soft glow a poor substitute for the roaring campfire I had come to rely on. It was a Thursday night when I woke to the sound of the dinner bell. At first, I thought it was in my head, a product of fatigue and paranoia. But then it rang again, louder this time, echoing from somewhere deeper in the house. My heart pounded as I sat up, clutching the whistle I still carried everywhere, like some kind of talisman. The sound came again, and I forced myself to move, stepping into the hallway. The house was deathly quiet, the air heavy with a strange stillness. When I reached the living room, I froze. There, sitting in my armchair, was one of the guests. I recognized him immediately, an older man with droopy eyes and a threadbare coat, one of the last people to check into the lodge before I left. He was perfectly still, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his gaze fixed on something just over my shoulder. I didn't dare turn around to see what he was looking at. I wanted to speak, to demand what he was doing here, but my throat closed up. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Slowly, as if sensing my presence, the man's head turned, his eyes locking onto mine, empty and dead, like looking into two bottomless pits. Then he smiled. The room grew cold, the temperature dropping so fast I could see my breath. The whistle in my hand felt like dead weight, useless against whatever this was. The final straw came when I received a package in the mail. It was small and unassuming, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. My hand shook as I tore it open, revealing a single item, the guest book. I stared at it, terrified, as the pages began to flip on their own. They stopped at a post I hadn't written, one that hadn't been there before. Nick Sanders, Room 7, checked in permanently. I knew then that the lodge wasn't just a place. It was a force, a sentient spirit that had claimed me as its own. The rules weren't meant to protect me. They were meant to bind me, to ensure I kept the fragile balance between our world and the one the lodge served. I tried to destroy the guest book, to burn it or rip it apart. But the pages wouldn't tear, and the flames refused to touch it. In a fit of panic, I threw it into the river, only to find it sitting on my doorstep the next morning, pristine and untouched. The guests began showing up more frequently after that. They didn't speak or move, but their presence was suffocating, a constant reminder that I could never escape. They would sit in my living room, line the halls, and stare at me from the foot of my bed. One night, as I cowered in the corner of my kitchen, the lodge's rules repeated in my mind. When locking up for the night, always count the chairs in the hall. If there are more or fewer than 10, do not proceed upstairs. My house had no chairs, none that I could see anyway. But when I turned around, there they were. 10 chairs, set neatly around the kitchen table, and in each one sat a guest, their hollow eyes fixed on me. I don't know when I stopped fighting. Maybe it was the night I found my image missing from every mirror in the house, or the day I heard the piano music playing softly from the attic, a tune I couldn't stop singing, no matter how hard I tried. In the end, I knew what I had to do. The lodge wanted me back, and it wouldn't stop until I returned. The guest book appeared on my nightstand the morning I made my choice, its cover open to a blank page. With a shaking hand, I wrote my name. The drive back to Tennessee felt like a funeral march. The lodge loomed larger than ever, its windows glowing faintly in the foggy night. As I stepped through the front door, I felt the weight of the rules settle over me like an old familiar coat. The air was thick with the smell of pine and decay, and the fire in the hearth roared to life without my touch. The cabin had been waiting for me. Now I wait for the next boss, the next soul desperate enough to take my place. The rules have already begun to change, their words shifting in the flickering firelight. I hear the whispers at night, saying that my time will come to an end. But deep down, I know the truth. The lodge never lets go, and neither will I.